Hello folks, this is Leah Bonasaki from Master Lab Systems. Today we'll be looking at integrating Java Spring Boot with OpenTelemetry for logging, trace and monitoring our applications. Okay, let's look at the agenda for today folks. Okay, so first of all we'll start to look at what is OpenTelemetry, why observability matters in Java Spring Boot, how OpenTelemetry works, tracing, metrics and logs, integrating Spring Boot step by step, exporting data to Jaeger or Prometheus or Grafana. However, in this case, we'll be using Jaeger. Live demo and trace visualization. Okay. So let's look at what is OpenTelemetry. Well, OpenTelemetry, or known as OTel, it's an open source observability framework for instrumenting, collecting and exporting telemetry data such as traces, metrics and logs. And the key features are a vendor neutral. OpenTelemetry supports multiple programming languages such as Java, Python, Go, C#, etc. And it works well with multiple backends such as Jaeger, UI, Zipkin and Prometheus for visualization of these collected logs and metrics. Okay, looking at the flow diagram of OpenTelemetry. So first of all, it's your application, or it's Java Spring Boot application, and then an OpenTelemetry SDK, which is dependencies of OpenTelemetry, and an exporter to export those collected metrics and logs, and an observability backend such as Jaeger or Zipkin or Prometheus. Okay. So why use it in Spring Boot? Well, it makes sense to use it to monitor distributed microservices, to find the bottlenecks and API calls, and to trace requests across services, correlate logs, metrics, and traces. Also, it works well with existing Java Spring Boot applications with a minimal code changes, which is what I'll be doing for today's demo. Okay, let's look at the core concept we have. So tracing would mean it's an end-to-end request flow tracking. A span is a unit of work within a trace. For example, a tracing would mean it's an endpoint that the request came through, and a span, it's a unit of work within a trace, meaning it's a work that was done for that request. For example, if you are adding something new, that's normally called a trace, and a span would mean it's an end-to-end flow to do that unit of work. Okay, so let's look at the project setup that we require for adding OpenTelemetry. Okay, so first of all, we require OpenTelemetry dependencies, and we need to configure OTel, which is OpenTelemetry, in application.yml, which is in application.properties, which is Java configuration file. So we need to just configure OTel so it can be able to collect and distribute those collected logs. And we will require to run Jaeger in a Docker to visualize the metrics collected. Okay, so let's look at now exporting data. Okay, so Jaeger is a distributed tracing tool. Basically, Jaeger, it works differently. Unlike Prometheus and Grafana that can collect these metrics, Jaeger is quite limited. If I could put it that way, Jaeger is a little bit limited because of it can collect logs and metrics. It only visualizes traces, which is what limits Jaeger to tools such as Prometheus or Grafana or Elasticsearch. So again, however, for this demo, we will only be collecting tracing using Jaeger. But in the next coming tutorials, we will look at how we can collect metrics and logs using the Prometheus and Grafana and Elasticsearch. Okay, so now we'll look at the live demo. So we need to start Jaeger in Docker, run the Spring Boot application with OTel, OpenTelemetry dependencies, make a few API calls, and showcase the collected traces in Jaeger UI. Okay, so folks, now let's go to my terminal so we can start to spin up our own Jaeger service instance. Okay, so I have done the process before, but I'm just gonna redo it again so you can follow it. Okay, so now first thing I need is to check what are running images, docker ps. As you can see, there's nothing else running, and if I were to do a docker ps-a, we currently don't have any Jaeger instance in our own my existing Docker images. So what I need now, I'm just gonna quickly get to this command, which is that spin up our own Jaeger instance and Jaeger tracing to trace those images, to trace those logs and maps them together. Okay, let's look at this command that we need to run. So which is docker run -d --name Jaeger -e, which is the environment. It needs to know that it needs to collect collector, and it's no OTLP -enable is equal to true, meaning we need to enable the collector, and we are mapping it to that pin, which is the Jaeger port, internal and outside, and also we are mapping to what? To a Jaeger tracing, which is another tool that traces those metrics and sends them to Jaeger, which is the Jaeger UI, using that port, which is 4317. Okay, so if I run that command now, let's hit enter. Okay, just finished the file. So now if I would go to I do another docker ps, we should see Jaeger image running. Okay, as you can see folks, it's 15 seconds ago, meaning it is up and running. So again, if I were to go to my Docker desktop just to show you how it looks like, okay, there it is, Jaeger is running. So now let's go view it on the browser. Okay, so this is how a Jaeger UI would look like with no service in it. As you can see now, there's currently no service at all, which is what we need to be adding new service, which is our application that will be monitoring using Jaeger. Okay, let's do it now. So as you can see folks, we currently have anything as a service, but we'll be integrating our own Java SpringBoot application so we can get these collected metrics. Okay, so now if I would go to our application, so currently this is my application that I will be using, which is my old existing project that we've been working and building on top of. However, if you wanted to build or to start a new project from scratch, I would strongly recommend you visit Spring Initializer, which quickly helps in setting up this project. So Spring Initializer, you can find it in start.spring.io. That's the default URL that will take you to this page. So here you're simply gonna have to select the language, which is Java, your build tool, preference, Maven, Java Spring Boot, version 3.5.4, and in project metadata, of course, content master lab. So if you are creating a new service from scratch, you can put that at effect and say maybe a catalog management, which is the project name. We'll give it a description. As you can see, the package is automatically created for us. Packaging, we'll leave it to Java. And Java version, we can use 17, which is fine. So dependencies that we require now, yes, we mostly require, which is, however, OpenTelemetry dependencies, you don't really much get them here because of it's not coming directly from Java Spring. So, however, you can use this one, which is OpenTelemetry, but I'll show you the ones that might just be much useful to use instead of using this one directly. So, okay, because we will also need an exporter, which I don't think it's available here. Of course, Lombok, but the basic ones, you can just add any one that you require. Dev tools, however, will show you the ones we require for integrating OpenTelemetry. Once you have all of this set up, fine, you can click generate, and it will automatically download the project to your local machine, and then you can export it to your desired IDE. Okay, so once you do that, folks, again, however, currently at my site, I'm already exported my project, and I've already, I will be using an existing Java Spring Boot project. So now what we require, let's now go ahead and start to add these dependencies. So let's open our POM file, Okay, as you can see, currently there is no OpenTelemetry dependencies, which is what we will be adding. So first of all, I will be using a dependency called a BOM. So what is a BOM? A BOM, it's okay. First of all, the abbreviation for BOM would mean it's a bill of materials. However, essentially in software development, that doesn't mean it's the case, because how we are using a BOM dependency mean if you have multiple dependencies that are coming from the same artifact ID or from the same group ID, and you want to group those for, so in case when there's a new update, a new version from each dependency, a BOM would automatically pull out the new changes instead of you doing that automatically or each time. So meaning it replaces the intervention of having you to automatically update each time when the dependency there's a new version, you have to change it. So a BOM takes care of that for you automatically. So let's look at now how would it look like this BOM dependency. Okay, so now let's first start by adding the BOM dependency, and then we'll then add the necessary dependencies for OpenTelemetry. So this is how a BOM dependency look like. As you can see, it is under a tag dependency manager because of it needs to manage these OpenTelemetry dependencies for us. Okay, so we don't have to rely on a specific version, meaning each time there's a new version for a OpenTelemetry dependency, a BOM will automatically pull out the new and update our project based on that. Okay, so now let's come in now and add these OpenTelemetry dependencies that we require. Okay, so we have these dependencies of which I will also be explaining them. So let me just copy them. Okay, so get that in. Okay, so we have these dependencies. As you can see, this is why we would really require a BOM to take care of this manual intervention. So for example, now we have about 4 dependencies that we require for OpenTelemetry, which is the API, the SDK, and the SpringBoot starter, which is the instrumentation, and the exporter to Jaeger that will export these collected metrics to Jaeger UI. So again, as you can see, all of these dependencies, they don't have any specified version, meaning instead of us having to manually intervene to the project by updating each dependency when there is a new version of a dependency, we can simply let the BOM, which is the BOM dependency, to take care of that automatically, as you can see, folks. Okay, so once we add all of these dependencies that we require for OpenTelemetry, you can simply update your Maven from file, so it can automatically pull out those dependencies for you. Okay, so now that we have all our necessary dependencies in, so meaning now what we can just do now, we need to configure now our properties file. Okay, so at first previously I was using this old way in this project. However, now that we keep on adding more dependencies, using this way it's static at some point, so it's better to just update or upgrade to a new way, which is using the YAML way, which is the application.yml. So we'll be using that, but of course it's still the same configuration, but it's just a new way of writing it. So as you can see, all of this is hashed out, meaning I'm not using this file in this project anymore, but we'll be using what? The application.yml. So of course it's still the same information provided, however it's just a different way of writing it. As you can see, it's still the same information in same configuration, but of course it makes this one much more easier to read and much more cleaner. Okay, so now let's go ahead now and add configuration for OpenTelemetry. Okay, so now I'm just gonna only copy what we need, because of we don't require Prometheus configuration. We're just gonna only use OpenTelemetry, which is the outer. Okay, so let's copy that in. I will explain it as well. So let's paste that in. Maybe just do. Okay. Now that we have that in, okay, so it means now what this means, OTAL, which is OpenTelemetry, uses the exporter of OTLP, which is OpenTelemetry exporter, and the to that endpoint, which is again what we used when we're spinning up this project. So again, it uses that port, which is 4318, to export this matrix. Okay, 4318, 4317. Okay, yeah, 4317. It uses that port, which is 4317. Yes. Okay, so once we have that in again, so this exporter, it's not using the direct HTTP protocol, but it's using a gRPC to export this matrix, which is a slightly different protocol. But anyway, without that, and again logs, since Jaeger doesn't accept logs directly, it only accepts traces. So we are, hence I said, using Jaeger, it limits you. However, for this time we'll be using Jaeger, but in the upcoming tutorial we'll try to do the same process using Prometheus, which is now a broader tool of monitoring and visualizing of these collected logs and metrics and traces. So for now, we're just going to be using the lightweight version, which is Jaeger. Okay, so of course, resource attribute service name needs to know that it's a catalog management application. Traces, as you can sample, always on, since we will only be collecting traces for our application. Okay, so once you have all of that in, you can save it. So it means now we have the necessary dependencies, we have the necessary configuration. So, and we have already started our Jaeger instance, and we can get it on the browser or on the UI. So it means now we can start our project. As I said earlier on, currently on Jaeger UI there is no service at all, meaning we haven't done our integration. So again, still okay, now it finds one instance, it needs to be two, because of, so winning the first instance that it will find to the Jaeger UI, it's the Jaeger tracing that collects, which is now the one that's using that port 4317, which is the Jaeger tracing image. So it finds that instance, which is the instance or the service that collects this matrix and transport those using the OTLP to that desired port. Okay, so it finds that now, as you can see, that's the first one, Jaeger all-in-one, which is the Jaeger tracing. So now once we start the SpringBoot application, which is our application, it needs to find the second tool service, which is now our SpringBoot application. So let's start out, folks, and now then we can begin our testing of sending some basic API requests. Then we can visualize those traces to Jaeger UI. Okay, so now if I start this project, okay, it will do a build. Okay, give it some few seconds. Okay. Okay, it's starting up. Okay, as you can see, OpenTelemetry, it has managed to find OpenTelemetry. Okay, now it's bootstrapping also our DB connection. Okay, also doing that, which is our GraphQL queries. Okay, as you can see, folks, now it seems to have started successfully on port 8080. Okay, so it has started our application. So now, if now we go to our UI again, then we can check if we can get the second service, which is our application. Now that we've started, I will do a refresh again. Proper, as you can see now, it has managed to find our application, which is catalog management. As you can see, folks, now we are having two services, which is now our application that we need. So I'll come in here, and instead of doing the last hour, I will just do last 5 minutes. Then we can start. Okay, maybe say here I will do 50. Okay, so before finding that traces, let's first send a few requests to our API. Okay, as you can see, our API started to running successfully fine. So now we can start to send our few requests to the API. Then we can be able to attempt to look at those traces using Jaeger UI. Okay, so now if we go to Postman, So again, let's first try to add this first simple book, which is now using this API endpoint, which is the API books and book. So if I send this book now, try to create one new book. Okay, as you can see, the first book has been successfully created. Let's now add another book. So this one is in Java, clean code, maybe do a slight change of the ISP, put some new digits, maybe change. Okay, that's fine. Let's again add this second book. Okay, as you can see, now we have two books now, which is the IT2 now. Let's run a get now to get all of these books, just to do a list of the new ones we created. Okay, as you can see, now we are getting 2 books, which is the new with the books we created. Okay, so now if we go to our Jaeger UI and then we start to look at those traces, see if we can find them. As you can see, now our application is available in Jaeger UI. So if now we do find traces, there is our traces. We can get these traces. As you can see, even the timestamp it's showing, and each request came to the service. So as you can see, we only made 3 requests, but of course automatically when Spring is setting up using this H2 in-memory DB, it starts to create the bootstrap and create the schema for us and create these tables for us. So as you can see, the first request that we made, which is to create the first book, as you can see, API, books, and book. So this is how Jaeger UI is very much useful in getting these traces for our application, meaning any malicious activity now can be caught directly, and we can see each request that was sent to our application, which makes it very much useful in monitoring the application state and making it easier for troubleshooting purposes. Okay, as you can see, it ran that SQL statement. We can even see the SQL statement it ran and even the DB that it uses or that it sent the query to. So as you can see, it ran an insert statement into, which is that book DB. As you can see, there's the DB name. Use that DB statement to run that again. So meaning, and it can also give us the host information that the request was sent from. So this is how useful this observability tool Jaeger is in terms of monitoring the traces for your application. Okay, as you can see now, even the get all books, which is now the last request we sent to return all the available books in our project, we can also get it here, and we can see even the memory that it uses, which is the database it uses, and even the, as you can see, even the DB operation, which is the select query. So we can get all of these traces to our own application. Oh, this is how useful this is, folks. So it makes it much easier to even monitor your application and even to detect for malicious activities going into your application. So using Jaeger, it makes it very much easier. Okay, I think, folks, we've done what we covered, and now on the next episode or the next tutorial, we'll be looking at how we can go. As you can see now, which is what I said earlier, that Jaeger UI can only collect traces. It can collect metrics and logs. It can only collect traces. Looking at this, what you can see here now at the bottom. So now again, as you can see, our application tried to export metrics and logs, but of course Jaeger UI is failing because of it can't accept those, because it doesn't, it's a lightweight version. It's not meant to accept metrics and logs. However, it can only accept traces. So again, which is not a problem for this tutorial, because of we didn't want to send metrics, but we wanted to only export traces, so we can see each request going into our application. Okay, so folks, as you can see now, we are getting all our traces going into our application, and we can filter and see each request that came in, meaning making it easier for monitoring and observability. Okay, so now let's just finalize now and wrap up our this tutorial. Okay, so again, we looked at how we can start Jaeger in Docker, and then we run our Spring Boot application and make a few API calls, and we showcased those in Jaeger's UI. Okay, so now let's look at the best practices, of course, before we wrap this session. So again, using sampling in production to reduce costs, which is very much useful, and taking spans with business relevant metadata, meaning, for example, it's important to take those spans so you can easily be able to filter by each tag to get a certain span. Okay, and combining logs plus traces for faster debugging. Again, this makes it much more easier when you have the logs and traces of your application, because if you are even trying to debug, it makes it easier to just filter by and debug based on your error logs or the error or warning logs that you are seeing from your application or from your observability tool. And it's important to keep exporters and agents up to date. So those exporters are very much useful to be kept up to date. So whenever, so they don't fail to export any error message or any error trace in the application. Okay, avoiding over instrumenting the application, because it makes too much spans or too much instrumentations. It may make your application to run slower, meaning it reduces the performance of the application. So by over instrumenting, it means by adding each trace, for example, instead of using the setup that we did, and then if your application is quite big and then you want to record each session of your application, so it means now by adding more instrumentations, it makes your application too much and it makes too much noise. Meaning by making too much noise, of course, it will reduce your application performance because of each trace, and these traces sometimes they are too much, uses too much memory. Okay, so again, looking at the common pitfalls. So forgetting to propagate context between threads, using mismatched exporter versions, which is again what we discussed, and exposing OTel endpoints to public, which is a big security risk. So again, that one is not allowed to expose, so which is now the endpoint of OTLP, which is this endpoint that's referring to, which is this one, which is this endpoint. It's very important not to expose it outside because of it poses so much risk. Okay, let me also stop this web server. Okay, so again, looking at the summary, folks, we discussed what is OTel, how it's useful, and how we can integrate it with our own Java Spring Boot, and how we can visualize our traces in Jaeger UI, and looking at the best practices and pitfalls to avoid. Okay, folks, I will end here. If you have any question, please drop them in the comment section. I will answer those. And also, if you need this repo or anything that you require from my side, I will definitely be able to provide it. And again, even this repo, I will push out to GitHub if you guys are needed. Again, folks, if you like this video, please subscribe to my channel and share. Thank you, folks. See you next time. Cheers. Peace out.